BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Okay, today isn't actually Monday, it's Thursday. Last Monday on Zodiac Monday, I did an interview with Michael Butterfield talking about his new book, The Zodiac Killer, the story of America's most elusive murderer. And thank you to everyone who checked that out, as well as participating in the live stream that came out Tuesday here on Black Box Online Radio. But what you're going to hear in this episode is a reiteration of an older Zodiac Monday that I did back in December, where I was discussing the book One Night in October by Gerald Gregory Doane. And this is an excellent Zodiac Killer book. It's one of the best true crime books, period, that I've read in the last year, and I recommend it to the nth degree. But I listen to a lot of older episodes of Black Box Online Radio. About once a day, actually, I check out an old episode of BBOR, and I happen to land on the Zodiac Killer News Report One Night in October edition. And I was really surprised by a lot of things that I was saying. Firstly, I wasn't talking about what I genuinely believed about Gerald Gregory Doane's observations. Instead, I was, by my own admission, playing the field and just saying, all right, well, this is an unsolved case, and he has his observations, but there are other observations made by different people, and here's a list of other people who might not be in agreement with him. But that's not exactly what I would do if I had the opportunity to recreate the episode. So that's what I wanted to do with this one. I wanted to talk about some more things from his book, One Night in October, as well as sharing some more things about my own genuine responses, as opposed to just listing off different counter-arguments that have been created by other people. So let's get right into it. But first, you can always hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and I am your host, Black Box Ned. One Night in October is written by Gerald Gregory Doane, who was a responding officer to the murder of Paul Stine, the Zodiac Killer's final confirmed victim. Paul Stine was murdered on October 11th of 1969. He was a taxi driver who drove the Zodiac Killer to a place in Presidio Heights. The Zodiac shot him once in the side of the head, then exited the taxi and appeared to have been wiping down the cab with most likely a piece of Paul Stine's own shirt, and then he walked away into the darkness, never to be seen or heard from again. But I thought that this book, One Night in October, was going to be just a memoir of the responding officer saying, okay, this is what happened after the Zodiac Killer left. This is what happened when I was an investigator. This is what happened when I was working with law enforcement. And it would tell the story of October 11th, 1969, and then the following events, the meetings that he would have had, just like a personal story. But that is so far from the truth. And by the cover's own admission, it's also going to talk about profiling. And I thought an appropriate title for this book discussion would have just been Zodiac Killer Crime Scene Analysis, because it appears that that's what Gerald Gregory Doane's intention really is with this book. He wanted to take the facts and arrange them. He started, of course, by being a responding officer in 1969, but he read Robert Graysmith's 1986 book Zodiac, which a lot of people do, and then he also read the book In the Shadow of Mount Diablo by Mike Rodelli, and that book is going to heavily influence his thinking. But what he wanted to do with One Night in October is to document as much of the Zodiac information as possible, to talk about the facts of the case, and what is actually a fact. What do we truly know about the Zodiac? Then, what are some suggestions that could be made about the Zodiac? What does the hard evidence suggest? And then try and use that to create a psychological profile, a behavioral profile, a geographic profile, and everything across the profiling spectrum. And I think that these are going to be some very fascinating observations that we're going to go through right here. And while the early chapters talk about his own personal experiences with the Zodiac Killer mystery, I found that the book really came alive in chapter 37, and that's where we're going to start. And if you do read this one, Gerald Gregory Doane frequently uses the term black pins, which is almost as if you could take a black pin and place it on an abstract map or chart and show a type of feature about the Zodiac Killer. Let's look at the description of the Zodiac Killer that we have. Black pin number 1. The Lake Herman Road crime scene, and there was no description of the perpetrator. On December 20th of 1968, the Zodiac attacked David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. There were no survivors. There is no description of the Zodiac Killer. Excellent point. Black pin number 2. The Blue Rock Springs witness, who was a white male adult, a white male adult named Mike Michaud, described the Zodiac Killer as a white male with a stocky build, large face, light or blonde hair. And it says light or blonde hair, but if I recall, Mike Michaud also stated that he saw reddish-brown curls in the Zodiac's hair after the shooting at Blue Rock Springs Park. Black pin number 3. The Lake Berryessa witness, Brian Hartnell, described the Zodiac as being 5 feet 8 inches tall to 6 feet tall, 225 to 250 pounds, dark brown hair, wearing a black or dark blue set of pants, and a blue zippered windbreaker with the collar turned up, and a paper bag type square mask. Well, let's be clear, there were 2 witnesses at Lake Berryessa, and Brian Hartnell openly stated that he was not a good judge of height because of his own height. Brian was very tall, around 6 feet 6 or 6 feet 7 inches tall. Cecilia Shepard estimated that the Zodiac Killer was 6 feet tall at Lake Berryessa, and when I think he says 5 foot 8 to 6 feet tall, I think that Gerald Gregory Doane is talking about how the Zodiac could have been 5 feet 8 inches tall, and that the Lake Berryessa hood added to his height to make him appear taller. But the Zodiac is wearing the hooded costume at Lake Berryessa, and it's referred to as a square on top paper bag type mask. Does that mean that this actually was a square mask, or was it a paper bag type mask? I know that he's saying that it's similar to a paper bag, but there are people out there who genuinely believe that the Zodiac was wearing a type of colored papered bag at Lake Berryessa, and I just think that Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard would be completely aware if they were looking at somebody wearing a paper bag versus a cloth mask. I think even if it had been colored and modified, and it had been pressed together with some type of wax or something like that, they probably would still be able to tell what paper is and what cloth is. So I really hope he just means that metaphorically, or looks similar to a paper bag. Other people have tried to bring this to my attention, that they believe that the Zodiac's hood at Lake Berryessa would have been a perfect square, something like 12 inches by 12 inches, approximately, in a square shape. But I just simply have to point out that when I look at all of the illustrations of the Lake Berryessa costume, it appears that the Zodiac is wearing a rectangular mask. And I know a square is a type of rectangle, but not all rectangles are square. It appears that it's much longer than it is wide. But again, that's just my observation. I suppose that it's possible, but I think that it's unlikely. And if he just means that it has the dimensions of a brown paper bag, sure. But I absolutely think that the Lake Berryessa costume was made out of cloth. And if you do read this book, One Night in October, it divides the sections into different parts. And one section is called Interpretations. This is actually part 5 in the book. Jumping ahead a couple pages, I think that the interpretations of the evidence are going to be so valuable because so many times people come to me on maybe at the email address blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, or perhaps they are just in the comments section here on YouTube, and they say something to the effect of, well, how do we actually solve the Zodiac Killer mystery? I know that there are books out there, I know that people are telling stories, but how do we actually evaluate the evidence to crack the case? And to the credit of Gerald Gregory Doane, this interpretation section is putting a step in that direction. It's talking about, this is what the evidence is, this is what the evidence could possibly suggest. And interpretation number 1, there is plenty of evidence that the Zodiac's crimes were planned in advance and in detail. Now, this is something that I mostly agree with. Again, to share what I genuinely think, I think the Zodiac was methodical. I think he was calculating. I also think that the Zodiac was very smart. I think the Zodiac knew what he was doing. But I gave the Zodiac way too much credit in the past. I used to think that the Zodiac Killer had everything planned out well before December 20th of 1968. I thought that he tried to create a criminal masterpiece and put everything in motion, but I had to admit that I was wrong about that. Specifically, I thought that the Zodiac designed all of his ciphers before 1969, that he had designed the Z408, the Z340, the Z13, and the Z32 ciphers, and he released them at calculated intervals. I thought that these would be his creations, that he's just waiting to show the world, because again, he's a methodical planner. But I had to admit that I was wrong for the following reason. After the 340 cipher was solved in 2020, we saw that it contained the contemporary reference, "That wasn't me on the TV show," referring to somebody appearing on the Jim Dunbar show pretending to be the Zodiac Killer. And that had happened well after 1968. That happened in 1969. And it also happened after the 408 cipher had been solved. So this goes to show that the Zodiac Killer either created the 340 cipher completely after that person's appearance on the Jim Dunbar show, the hoaxer or the copycat, or at the very least he modified the cipher after the appearance on the TV show. I hope you're having lots of fun trying to catch me. "That wasn't me on the TV show," is how the 340 cipher begins. So this suggests that everything that I was thinking about how this is a super methodical and planning Zodiac is not exactly true. The Zodiac was smart, he was calculating, he was methodical, but I gave him way too much credit in the past. A lot of the stuff was either put together or modified as he was going through 1969. Interpretation number 2. At Lake Herman Road on December 20th of 1968, the Zodiac Killer claimed that he used a pencil flashlight on his weapon to more easily target his victims, and he also used disguises from time to time. He changed his weapons from crime to crime. He used airplane glue on the tips of his fingers to obscure his fingerprints, and the use of complicated ciphers to hide his identity are clear evidence of planning. Well, I definitely believed the Zodiac was telling the truth about using the pencil flashlight at Lake Herman Road so he could shoot the victims in the dark when he said that in a letter. And the next part of this is that the Zodiac was using airplane glue on his fingertips. Now that is something the Zodiac claimed as well. He said that he did not leave any fingerprints behind because he put 2 coats of airplane cement on his fingertips. It's my understanding that this is not an established fact, but I do believe that. I believe that the Zodiac did this exactly as he said, to obscure his fingerprints. And as we're going to see, the Zodiac evidence in regards to fingerprints is very questionable. The use of complicated ciphers to hide his identity are clear evidence of planning, and I've already talked about that, so I'm mostly in agreement with all of this here. Yes, okay, I am in agreement. And 4 of the incidents, including the Lake Herman Road murders, Blue Rock Springs shooting, Lake Berryessa, and Presidio Heights, were all planned well in advance, and the 5th incident may have been planned, but more likely was an outlier crime of opportunity. Now here's a big difference between my own thinking and Gerald Gregory Doane's thinking. He accepts that this quote-unquote 5th incident is genuine Zodiac activity. That is the Kathleen Johns incident, the attempted abduction of a woman off of Highway Route 132, and it was when the Zodiac said that a woman's wheel was wobbling and he told her to pull over. He claimed that he was trying to help her, but he actually made it worse. He gave an interesting ride to a woman and her baby. I personally do not think that the Kathleen Johns incident was genuine Zodiac activity, but he has included her as a confirmed victim in all of his psychological observations. But even if we take Kathleen Johns out of the equation, I completely agree with these observations about how the Zodiac is a methodical planner. But let's look at some different types of interpretations. What do the victim profiles suggest? Meaning, why did the Zodiac Killer choose these people? David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferret and Mike Michaud, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stine, all victims whom I think were killed by the same person. Let's look at the victim profiling section. Information provided by the Zodiac and his communications indicated that he did not know his victims previous to the crimes. He selected them because of their location and circumstance. I mostly believe this. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it turns out that there was some type of connection between the Zodiac and one of the victims, But if I'm sharing what I genuinely think, then yes, I do agree with that, simply because it's been unconfirmed. I know that there are so many people out there who are going to say that Darlene Ferrin was the key to everything. She was the witness that knew the Zodiac's true identity. She was the person that could have identified him, or he had a personal grudge against Darlene Ferrin. And all of that is speculation and conjecture. Then you have somebody like me who said for the longest time that he thought Cecilia Shepard was the only victim that was known to the Zodiac Killer, and that he wore the hooded costume at Lake Berryessa because he didn't want to be recognized. If there was any woman that he wanted to kill, it was Cecilia Shepard. But I ultimately just had to admit that I didn't know that. And one of you guys in the comments section brought up something that was excellent when you said that, okay, the whole thing about the Lake Berryessa costume, maybe he wasn't trying to hide his identity from Cecilia Shepard. Maybe he just wore the costume at Lake Berryessa because he would have felt very nervous without it. He would have felt like he was uncomfortable. He would have thought that they would be judging him. He thought that perhaps if he put the mask on, it would be easier for him to talk to the victims, and he wouldn't have looked like a bumbling mess. Bear in mind that Brian Hartnell, the surviving victim at Lake Berryessa, openly asked the Zodiac Killer if he was nervous because he saw his hand shaking, and the Zodiac said, yes, I guess so, and Brian said, I would be nervous too. So perhaps he did this as a type of confidence boost, or just a way of calming his nerves, because it does seem like the Zodiac Killer is a relatively insecure individual. Now, here's some other things about the victim profiling. That information provided by the Zodiac in his communications indicated that he did not know the victims, and that he chose them based on the location and the circumstance. In the Zodiac's phone call after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, he referred to the victims as kids. He also used the term kid, a shooting victim, in his letter to the newspaper in April 20th, 1970. The use of the term kid or kids does not suggest that he knew the victims previously, but he indicated that he was much older than the victims. Well, now wait a second, if I can give my honest take on the subject, I don't think that calling the kids or kid that he murdered at Lake Herman Road or Blue Rock Springs has any relevance or connection to not knowing the victims. And again, this is something that came up from one of you guys in the comment section. That just suggests that he thought that he was more mature than the victims. What should he say? If he did know Darlene Ferrin, oh yeah, I shot Darlene Ferrin, oh, that bitch betrayed me, or something like that. Well, that would create an opportunity for investigators to find a connection back to him. Again, how are you going to say that the Zodiac Killer is some type of cold, methodical, and calculating serial killer, and be surprised when he doesn't give everything away in the letters? We've dealt with this for years, so I don't think that this statement about how he's referring to the victims as kid or kids, not calling them out by name, is something that suggests that he did not know them personally. If anything, perhaps he didn't know them personally because of the randomness in the locations or the infrequency in Zodiac crimes. I mean, there's not enough evidence to say that he did know them personally, but this exact sentence, I really don't think that furthers the case. I think that that's just talking about his level of maturity. In the Zodiac's letter, July 31st, 1969, he states, I am the killer of the girl on the 4th of July. He left out the boy that he tried to kill that night until later in the letter when he suggests that the Zodiac. This suggests that the Zodiac was only targeting the girl, and the boy was a collateral victim. On the other hand, the Zodiac knew by the time he wrote the letter that the boy had survived. I think that's self-explanatory. I am the murderer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July. He directly left out the male victim, Mike Mageau, from that introductory set of words because he knew that Mike Mageau had survived by that point. The Blue Rock Springs shooting occurred on July 4th, and this is July 31st. Weeks have passed, so why would he include Mike Mageau in the murder count if he openly knew that Mike Mageau had not been murdered? Again, I think that that's self-explanatory, so I don't really think that also suggests anything about the Zodiac choosing his victims because they're male or female. He's just stating the facts. He shot a boy and a girl, and they died at Lake Herman Road, and he shot a girl, and she died at Blue Rock Springs Park, and he didn't mention her because he's listing the murder victims, not the survivors. But let's keep going. In the July 31st, 1969 letter to the three newspapers, the Zodiac included ciphers, coded messages in each letter. In the decoded version, he says that killing is more fun than getting your rocks off with a girl. If decoding this is correct, and it most likely is, then this statement indicated that a girl may have been his intended target as well as his source of motivation. Now, this is a genuine point of disagreement that I have. So many people try to highlight this and say that the Zodiac Killer did not like women. They say that the Zodiac hated women, that the women were the targets, and the men were collateral victims, as Gerald Gregory Doane puts it. But in all seriousness, this exact statement here, killing is more fun than getting your rocks off with a girl, I think that that is only a general statement about sex. What the Zodiac is saying is that killing is more fun than sex. He's not saying anything about hating women in that exact sentence. He is only saying that killing is more exhilarating than sexual intercourse to completion. I mean, if we can understand this word for word. So this would be a point of contention, and I think that the correct interpretation of the Zodiac's writings has nothing to do with hating women. And in fact, the Zodiac is talking about the victims, calling them the boy and the girl and so on. That also doesn't mean that there's any hatred toward the victims. Instead, what it appears is that the Zodiac Killer is simply full of himself. And I think Gerald Gregory Doane's observations about how the Zodiac was pre-choosing the victims based on location and circumstance, not location or circumstance, location and circumstance, would be much more defendable than just saying that he hated women or he's trying to get rid of the male victims as collateral damage. Next paragraph. The Zodiac often referred to his victims as persons who would never be missed, and as slaves in the afterlife that he would torture in various ways. So I shall tie over anthills and watch them scream and twitch and squirm. Others nail them and burned. Others shall be placed in cages and fed salt beef until they are gorged. Then I shall listen to their pleas for water, and I shall laugh at them. Others will hang by their thumbs and burn in the sun. I will be screaming, and all billiard players will play in a darkened dungeon with crooked cues and twisted shoes. His real victims, though, that he murdered, were different from the slaves in the afterlife. His slaves in the afterlife were demons, and demons were the source of his anger and pent-up frustration, which he projected onto the real victims, innocent persons who would never be missed. Now, if you want to talk about this metaphorically, I can follow that. I don't necessarily know if the Zodiac believed anything about slaves in the afterlife. He does say this multiple times in multiple communications, that the reason why he is killing is because he wants to die and be reborn in paradise, and those whom he has killed will be his slaves. But, I mean, I just don't know if the Zodiac believed anything about that. If he just says that there are demons that are haunting him, metaphorically, I could accept that. But let's go ahead to a different section of interpretations. The dates and times. It looks like Saturday and the weekend were predominantly the day and period as far as suspect activity was concerned. The Zodiac was clearly a weekend warrior, since his activities occurred on weekends. This suggests that he was engaged in other endeavors such as work, business, or play during the weekdays, at least during those periods when he committed his crimes and communicated his involvement in the crimes. The time data suggests the time of occurrences may be crime-specific, such as acting late at night to find a victim at a specific Lover's Lane location, or to find them in compromising situations, or the timing prior to the event or the circumstance. So I have one point of contention here, and that mostly relates to how he's talking about how the Zodiac was engaged in work and play during work, business, or play during weekdays. And it's the work and business part. Now he says work, business, or play. I mean, that's such a vague statement, but I'm just looking at the facts. If we don't know the Zodiac Killer's identity, how do we know that the Zodiac Killer had a job? How do we know that the Zodiac Killer was employed at all? How do we know that the Zodiac Killer was doing anything from 9 to 5? Maybe he was asleep from 9 to 5 from December of 68 to October of 69, and he only went out at nights except on one weekend at Lake Berryessa. And I do mean this because, okay, he mailed the letters most likely during the day, to be fair. But, I mean, the whole point is, if we don't know who the Zodiac was, how do we know that he was engaged in work? during the weekdays. I mean, this could very simply just be that he's doing something else during the days, or he's going out because he expects that he has a better chance of targeting a victim at night. Even a fool will know that it's going to be easier to sneak around in the dark unless you're in a very secluded area like Lake Berryessa when he went out in the daytime. So I think that this aspect of the profile is a little bit too assumptive, and some people have their very, very well concocted and created observations, such as the Zodiac Killer must have been working with something like drafting or engineering, or maybe even something artistic where he would have had his own private office or studio, maybe even a home office or studio where he had access to a light table, drafting equipment, and graph paper. Maybe he had it in his own basement and he worked from home. That's how he was able to create the letters and the ciphers in a purely uninterrupted way. All right, I hear you. I follow you. That's what I would call a reasonable possibility, as opposed to stating that with certainty that we know that the Zodiac had some type of employment. Okay, let's keep going here. The recurring date of December 20th is something the Zodiac used, such as the Lake Herman incident and the postmark on the letter that was sent to the attorney Melvin Belli 1 year after the Lake Herman Road murders, where he asked for help. This recurring date implies that December 20th may stand for something significant with the Zodiac. I don't think so, actually. I mean, what's significant? The Lake Herman Road murders. I mean, the Zodiac mailed a letter to Melvin Belli on December 20th, 1969. The Lake Herman Road murders occurred on December 20th of 1968. Again, I think that should be self-explanatory. And even if this is just a reasonable possibility or an educated guess on my part, I would suggest that the Zodiac mailed the Melvin Belli letter because he was trying to mark the 1 year anniversary of the Lake Herman Road murders, the crime that he committed. So to say that there's any more significance than that, I think is either somewhat of a reach or that there are not enough facts to support that he was specifically using December 20th for anything else than that. But could there be another date that's significant to the Zodiac Killer? The reoccurring 27th is something that the Zodiac used. The Zodiac committed a murder on September 27th of 1968. Okay, it says 1968, but of course he means 1969. The Lake Berryessa stabbing was September 27th, 1969. That must be a typo. And the postmark on the postcard mailed to Paul Avery, that's the Halloween card, at the San Francisco Chronicle, is October 27th, 1970. This suggests that the 27th day of a month may stand for something significant. I don't think so either. I think there's insufficient evidence to say that. Now, maybe there is, but as of now, I don't think we have enough facts to say that the number 27 is significant to the Zodiac. I'm sure people can concoct some of their own reasons, and perhaps they can connect the dots in their own mental way, which they have every right to. I mean, you can put forward a possibility if you recognize that it is only a possibility. What I genuinely think about the Halloween card is that the Zodiac Killer mailed that because it was before Halloween, because it's 3 or 4 days before Halloween. He wanted Paul Avery to get the Halloween card before Halloween because it's the season of Halloween. And ultimately, that's where I think it ends. Now, September 27th, October 27th, is that a clue? I am not convinced of that, and maybe if we had a lot more reoccurring things with the number 27, then you might have something to stand for, but just these two examples, September 27th and October 27th, December 20th, 68, December 20th, 69, that doesn't show me that this has any real significance or meaning to the killer. If anything, this is just done because, again, to commemorate the Lake Herman Road murders, and he wants to mail the Halloween card before Halloween. So let's look at some of the activities of the Zodiac Killer here in regards to locations, the interpretations of the locations. The location data leads me to believe that the Zodiac lived, worked, or did business, or had personal interests within all of the locations where the crimes occurred and where the Zodiac was observed by witnesses as he fled the crime scene and the locations from which he mailed the letters. Now, this is a pretty generous set of terms here. He lived, worked, or did business or had personal interests within all of the locations where the crimes occurred. Well, you might as well have just said, well, I think that he was on planet Earth at the time. Or how about when I begin the show saying, coming to you from West Virginia? And you could say, well, I think that this guy, Black Box Ned, perhaps he lived, worked, did business, or had some type of personal interest with West Virginia. And you would be correct, but what exactly, what would be the scope of that? That is just so broad and so vast that it doesn't really narrow it down very quickly. And then you also have the Zodiac had an intimate knowledge of the Bay Area, including Napa, Solano, San Francisco, Alameda, and Stanislaus counties, including the cities of Vallejo, Napa, Pleasanton, and particularly San Francisco. I don't doubt that at all. And once again, if I'm going to talk about what I genuinely think, and I think Gerald Gregory Doane would be in complete agreement with this, I think the Zodiac was in Northern California for the entirety of Zodiac activity. If we're talking about from December of 68 to October of 69, I think he was in Northern California. Maybe he crossed the state line at some point, but I think that he was based out of Northern California, no matter what he was doing, employed or not. On leave from the military or not, or just, maybe he was working a job or not. I think he was in Northern California for almost every single day from December 20th of 68 to October of 69. But if you want to challenge me on that, you can put your ideas in the comments section down below. There are a lot of Zodiac Killer suspects that are going to be moving about all across the world and so on, and they're going to be arriving in California at different dates. And if you want to provide an explanation for that, I would love to hear you out. Now, this is one of the boldest statements here. The Zodiac was at all the crime locations prior to committing the offenses, either as a participant or a surveillant. Wow, this is a powerful statement. When I first read that, I was thinking, goodness, how on earth could that be true? But then I thought, wait a second. We have the William Crow sighting of a suspicious vehicle at Lake Herman Road prior to the Lake Herman Road murders. Mike Mageau reported that a suspicious vehicle also arrived at Blue Rock Springs Park, shortly before he was shot with Darlene Ferrin. And that's the suspicious car that pulls in, then goes away, comes back around 5 minutes later. And maybe that was the Zodiac, maybe it wasn't. The Zodiac was definitely at Lake Berryessa prior to the crimes because he had to walk around 500 meters from Brian Hartnell's car, or from the, let's just say from the road area or some type of more land-based area to the peninsula where Brian and Cecilia were. So he is using that time to scope the crimes out. Now, Presidio Heights is a little bit more difficult. I tend to think that the Zodiac had scouted out Presidio Heights and he had an exit strategy, and I would completely admit that that's an educated guess on my part. But I do think that the Zodiac knew exactly where he wanted to go in Presidio Heights, based on the fact that we have evidence to support it. When Donald Fouke saw the Zodiac walking away from the Presidio Heights crime scene, and he didn't know that was the Zodiac at the time, but he said that he had no hurry in his step, he even walked with a shuffling lope, and he just doesn't seem concerned or worried at all about anything, and it seems like he knew where he was going. If we can make an observation, the only one of these that I would truly challenge would be the Lake Herman Road murders, because I'm not convinced for a second that William Crow actually saw the Zodiac Killer. Okay, so he's at Lake Herman Road on the night of, and he gets out of his girlfriend's car, actually, which was owned by her father, and he tries to tinker with the motor of the new sports car, and some car pulls into Lake Herman Road. He gets bothered, so he gets in the car and drives away, and that car starts following him. We don't know that that was the Zodiac. Think about what Gerald Gregory Doane already said in his own book, One Night in October. There is insufficient evidence to say anything about the Zodiac Killer's description at Lake Herman Road. What kind of car was he driving? We don't know. Well, maybe we do, as a kind of like a lighter colored station wagon. Could be. It could be. Or we could also say that we don't know anything about the killer's physical appearance at Lake Herman Road. We don't know that William Crow actually saw the Zodiac Killer that night. So that's the one that I would challenge, but Blue Rock Springs, it's quite possible the Zodiac did scout it out. Lake Berryessa, I mean, he had to because he's walking such a large distance, and it seems like he's hiding behind the tree line, making sure that the coast is clear before he puts on his Lake Berryessa costume to stab Cecilia. And even though I can't certify it, I think that he had scouted out the Presidio Heights location. And even if it wasn't the exact part of the street where he wanted to stop, I think that the Zodiac got out of the cab roughly where he wanted to go at Presidio Heights, and he had an exit strategy. So, again, we're on point there. And to continue, the Zodiac's activities in San Francisco were telling. He lived, worked, and had other types of interest in business or recreation in relation to San Francisco. Again, absolutely not. I don't think there's any evidence to say that the Zodiac worked in San Francisco. I mean, how do we know he had a job? And the Zodiac could have lived in Vallejo, he could have lived in Benicia, he could have lived in Alameda, he could have lived in countless places in Northern California, and very simply, he didn't want to commit crimes in his own backyard because it would be more difficult for the police to try and catch him if he goes to Presidio Heights and he doesn't live there. If he goes to other parts of San Francisco and he doesn't live there, not saying he did or anything like some of these other crimes that the Zodiac has been accused of, but what if the Zodiac didn't live in Vallejo and he's just using that as some type of like red herring or false lead? The Zodiac wrote about Vallejo in multiple letters. He never mentioned Benicia. If anything, that should give you some cause for concern. He said he had good times in Vallejo. At Lake Berryessa, he wrote the word Vallejo on the car door. So the Zodiac could be throwing false leads. He could also just not be telling you directly where he lived. So if we're going to talk about anything in relation to geographic profiling, it seems like some of these things could be somewhat misleading. The Zodiac also had an interest in theater. His repeated use of language from The Mikado, a comic opera, which is about Coco, the Lord High Executioner in the town of Titipu, and he says that the victims will not be missed. I don't dispute this for a second. I mean, yes, the Zodiac doesn't quote the Mikado once. He quotes the Mikado in multiple letters. The Zodiac makes it very clear that the Mikado is either important to him, he's a fan of it, or it's the type of language that he wants to convey. Yes, it seems like the Zodiac was not only interested in theater. Again, I think the Zodiac was actually the type of person who was very creative, involved in very artistic endeavors. Even if he was not necessarily an artist himself, he was definitely fascinated by the stuff. The Zodiac also had other interests, work and recreation related, ranging from Napa County all the way to Pleasanton, in southern Alameda County, and across the San Joaquin Valley. Now, this is also some stuff that I just question. Do we really know that the Zodiac is choosing these places because he has personal connections there that are related to work or his recreational activities? I know what they're trying to say. The Zodiac's familiar with the back roads. The Zodiac is familiar with the getaway points. The Zodiac is familiar with the exit strategies. All of that could have been done with planning. Again, this book is talking all about how the Zodiac is a cold, methodical, and calculating planner. Well, maybe he lived in another town like Eureka. Maybe he lived on the border of Oregon and he came down for these activities. We don't necessarily know that the Zodiac lived where he committed the crimes, and I'm sure all of us have heard the phrase at some point in our lives, "You don't shit where you eat." Some serial killers are going to be like that. Now let's look at some different interpretations of the Zodiac's behavior. The Zodiac made phone calls, and this is in the modus operandi section. The Zodiac made phone calls to the police immediately after 2 incidents, and these are clear admissions of guilt. I agree completely. He took responsibility for the crimes, the Blue Rock Springs shooting and the Lake Berryessa stabbing. I agree completely, and directed the police to 2 scenes of the crime, and he took responsibility for the crimes that had just occurred and referenced a previous crime during the Blue Rock Springs call by saying last Christmas. The telephone call admission about the Lake Herman incident came 6 months later, indicating that the Zodiac was waiting to assess the police response to that crime and was waiting to know if the police had identified a suspect. I mean, that's a little bit speculative, and that seems like he's connecting the dots in his own way, but most likely that's what happened. I'll give him that one. The telephone calls supplied information about the suspect's identity, indicating that the Zodiac wanted to inform but desired anonymity. Yes, the Zodiac isn't even saying this is the Zodiac speaking during the calls. That is one thing that shocked me when I got into the Zodiac mystery, that his signature line is this is the Zodiac speaking, but he didn't say that during the calls. I know that the Blue Rock Spring shooting occurred before he had announced that his name was the Zodiac, but Lake Berryessa didn't. He could have just picked up the phone, called Officer Slate, and said, this is the Zodiac speaking, but he didn't do that. So this is, this is something that I do agree with. He wanted to have anonymity during the calls. The Zodiac appeared to have targeted the victims in all 4 homicide incidents because of their remote locations and compromised, easy-to-target, and contained areas. Yes, okay, I mean, I completely agree with you here, but if that's the case, Gerald Gregory Doane, then why does the Zodiac have to live in San Francisco? Why does he have to live in any of the areas where he committed the crimes? It just says here he targeted the victims because they were in remote areas. Think about what I said earlier in this episode: location and circumstance. He had the opportunity to commit the crimes, and the locations were remote. I think that those are the facts that we have. And to say anything else that, oh, he must have lived in San Francisco, he must have lived in Vallejo, I don't know that. And I'm definitely not convinced 100% of that at all. The Zodiac's modus operandi does not change only with the locations and the victims, but the changes also suggest that there was situational targeting. Fair enough. I mean, see, for an example with this, I don't see how the Zodiac could have known that he was getting into Paul Stein's taxi as opposed to a different taxi. I mean, I really think the Zodiac may have wanted to murder a taxi driver that night, but I don't think he would have specifically known that it was Paul Stein. The Zodiac's letters and cards were a complicated diversion or redirection campaign that the public and the police were dealt with, where attention was taken away from his crimes and identity. If the police and the public are connecting the meaning of the ciphers and threats and bombs to children and the taunts and the evidence, then the actual crimes will be on the back burner. Okay, now we're actually getting to something of some very strong substance right here, and that is that I genuinely believe this too. Maybe I can't, give you 100% certainty, as I've been, somewhat critical of Gerald Gregory Doane for, but yes, the Zodiac is saying a bunch of crap in his letters, talking about attacking school children. Well, he didn't attack school children, to the best of our knowledge. Talking about making a bomb, he didn't detonate a bomb, to the best of our knowledge. Talking about creating crimes that are disguised as routine robberies and accidents, well, we don't really know what's going on with that. And also, a very good point, that the creation of the ciphers, period, is going to distract people from the Zodiac's actual murders. So, there are lots of confusing elements that have been thrown in on the part of the Zodiac. But you could chalk that up very easily to one possibility that I would propose, and that is that the Zodiac wanted attention. He's doing all this for a specific type of narcissistic recognition as opposed to attention. Oh, I've murdered people. I'm dangerous. I'm powerful. I felt denied a certain sense of well-being in my youth. Now I want to recreate these destructive tendencies and share them with society because it's society's fault. The negative aspects of society forced my parents to traumatize me, so now I am going to inflict misery, pain, suffering, and most importantly, terror on as many people as possible, and that leads to the creation of the Zodiac Killer's persona. And I think that that would be an excellent place to end this episode. And once again, this was a reiteration of a previous discussion that I had on Gerald Gregory Doane's One Night in October, and I perhaps will work this book into some future episodes of Zodiac Monday. And also, there are quite a few other books that I'm exploring right now, talking to some of the writers, trying to get them as guests on the program. Part 2 of my interview with Michael Butterfield will come out on the next Zodiac Monday, and if you're listening to this in the future, feel free to visit my interview segments that I've done with Michael Butterfield, the webmaster of ZodiacKillerFacts.com, as well as the author of The Zodiac Killer, The Search for America's Most Elusive Murderer. And if you want to support any of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And I release shorts and reels Monday through Friday on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and here on YouTube. My Facebook name is Ned Dahan, and my Instagram and TikTok name is blackboxonlineradio. I did a very long stretch of Jack the Ripper shorts, but now I've switched back to talking more about general true crime cases. Once again, those come out Monday through Friday, and if you haven't subscribed yet to Black Box Online Radio, please feel free to do so you can follow along with all of these true crime discussions. In addition to the Zodiac Monday episodes and the shorts, I also talk about Jack the Ripper on Wednesdays, DB Cooper on Fridays, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, normally, I come to you guys live for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. So there's lots of true crime content going around. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. Become one of the Nedheads. Become one member of the Black Box Battalion, if you will. And thank you so much for listening to this episode. As you can see, I'm very curious about psychological profiling, as well as other things like victim profiling, behavioral profiling, and the geographic profiling. And in conclusion, though, I should give this final note. I recognize that Gerald Gregory Doane doesn't know all of these things, such as the Zodiac had business ties to San Francisco. It's what he thinks happened. It's almost as if this is his take on the subject, which he has every right to do, and he has every right to share in his own book. But at the same time, I'm the person who has to make the statement that I don't think the facts support those types of observations, so I hope I didn't come across as overly negative or anything when I'm challenging him on these points, but I would love to know what you guys think, and one more time, please share your responses in the comment section down below. You know where to get in touch, and that's all for me now. Good.